On this edition of Independent Sources, Catholic Conundrum, why immigrant students are taking the brunt of the city's Catholic school closures.
Unchained at last, helping women find their way out of arranged marriages.
And Island Style. One woman brings some Caribbean flavor to the Upper East Side for over 20 years. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Vianora Vinca.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. The Archdiocese of New York has closed 39 schools under its jurisdiction since 2000, and 24 more are scheduled to shut their doors by year's end. These closures are expected to affect several thousand students, the majority of them from immigrant families.
I sat down with Michael Deegan, the Associate Superintendent for Urban Education at the Archdiocese of New York, and Tim Reedy, the web editor at the Catholic publication America Magazine. We talked about why these Catholic schools are closing and the options for the many immigrant students who often choose them over public schools. For the sake of not generalizing, I'd like to start by saying that immigrants from Catholic countries are not all religious, and they don't all choose to send their children to Catholic schools, but Catholic schools have had a strong relationship with immigrants from these countries. Michael, talk about that relationship.
Well, I think that when immigrants come to this country, what they're looking for is they're looking for a sense of belonging, a sense of welcoming, and they're looking for a good education for their children because, as is the case with most parents, they want their children to do better than they. And Catholic education provides that. We have children in our schools from all over the world who come to us, and we educate them, and we prepare them for a successful life in society.
So historically, what have been the numbers? How many of the incoming immigrants have been attending Catholic schools?
Well, Catholic education has existed here in New York for 200 years. So we have a long track record of responding to immigrants, Irish, Catholic, Polish from Europe, and it has now moved into the Latino population, African Americans, and right now 30% of our children in our Catholic schools are Hispanic, and about 20% are African American. So almost half are from immigrant countries.
And how much does religion play into this, or, as you've hinted a little bit, how much does the fear of not knowing public schools here play into this choice on the part of immigrants? Tim?
I think it's a combination of both things. I mean, the Catholic Church for many immigrants is a welcoming community. It's the first place they may go to when they arrive in the country and introduce themselves. And so here in this country, Catholic schools are a natural kind of connection with the parish life. So even though some Catholic immigrants may not have gone to Catholic schools in their home countries, when they come here, their family, their friends, the parish priest may say, this is something you should consider.
Michael, what's going on now that we see so many Catholic schools closing?
Well, I think that what's happening is that because we're not getting the kind of government support that Catholic schools deserve and that by law should be receiving, the economics have been hurting us. We charge about $3,000 to educate one child. It costs us $6,000. So I think the gap between the two is getting larger and larger, and I think that while we have several buildings that we could close down and have closed down, we're still serving the same group of children.
What do you mean that by law you should be getting money from government?
Well, right now, New York State, for example, mandates that we follow certain procedures, that we administer certain tests, that we take attendance, et cetera. They're government mandates, and that some of those we are funded, we're paid to us, and others are not. And I think that unfortunately, one of the consequences of that is that we've had to close a number of our school buildings. And that's regrettable, because our hope would be that we would be able to get what we deserve in terms of government support.
What about tuition? What Michael was saying earlier, it should be higher than it currently is. Give us a sense of what that tuition is compared to private schools, Tim, and why aren't people willing to pay more?
It's roughly, as I understand it, about half of what the public schools are costing or spending per student. So it is definitely a good deal. But as Mike was saying, it's not covering all of the costs that Catholic schools are facing. In addition to what he described, there's, the cost of education has just gone up dramatically over the last decades. The cost of technology, what it costs to educate students in technology. Also the special needs that student faces with, various, if you have an autistic child or child with dyslexia, these are issues that, cost a lot of money to educate those children. So these are things that Catholic schools, it's becoming difficult for them to do.
So why not raise tuition? Is it because children attending these Catholic schools are coming from less advantaged financially?
Well, I certainly would say that's true of the inner city schools. I think, unfortunately, we are recruiting children who are disadvantaged. We want them to have a Catholic education. They deserve a Catholic education. We support Catholic education through fundraising and through some of our funding organizations. $30 million goes into scholarships just for poor inner city children to allow them an opportunity to come to our schools. Unfortunately, the cost, as Tim said, the cost of educating a child is outstripping even our best efforts to sink in that $30 million a year. So the church is very committed to the poor and educating immigrants. I think, unfortunately, what's happening is that since we're not getting that government support that we're owed and we can't raise more money, we're shrinking down and strengthening the system by having less buildings but as many children.
Well, I guess it would be controversial for the government to pitch in more, if you would agree, given the rest of the population perhaps not wanting to contribute to Catholic schools, don't you think?
Well, this has been a historic issue for decades, if not centuries, the question of whether Catholic schools should be getting more funding. It's something that the Catholic Church has been pushing for in one way or another for a long time. What Mike is describing is a clear way that I think Catholic schools deserve more government support. But there's also the whole question of vouchers, whether some of an individual's tax money should be able to, they should be able to choose which schools their student goes to, whether it's a Catholic school or a charter school or a private school.
The peak of the number of Catholic schools in the country was in the 70s or late 60s, and there has been a decline ever since. How do we know that this is the last of the schools closings that we're going to see?
Well, we're very confident here in New York. We have a strategic plan called Pathways to Excellence, which is essentially we have restructured our Catholic school system here in the New York area. And essentially what we've done is we've invited lay people to be on our boards of trustees. There has been a great deal of commitment to regionalizing our schools, strengthening them, reinvesting additional monies into our schools. So as I said, with this new governance model, with this opportunity for reinvestment of funding, we're very, very confident that this new model is in fact going to sustain our Catholic schools for generations.
And I think that's just what's needed, is this sort of creative thinking to see, okay, how can we continue to serve this population but in different ways? And regionalization is one answer. But finding ways, I've always thought that there should be ways that the Catholic community can serve students who are in public schools, maybe through after-school programs, to get that culture to them in some way. If they can't do it in the regular school environment, maybe there are other ways they can do it as well.
Can you envision United States without Catholic schools?
I think it would be a very sad day. I mean, I think Catholic schools have been a long part of this country's history, and they, as I was suggesting before, they save the government billions of dollars each year. I don't think the public school could take on all those students at this point. So I think there needs to be support of Catholic schools from the government and from our Catholic communities.
What about charter schools? They have been quite successful, and it's said that it got some of the students from Catholic schools.
Well, I think, talking about immigrants and the response to immigrants, it's very difficult for our Catholic schools, which is tuition-driven, to compete against those government schools called charter schools because they're free. In fact, most charter schools have emulated the characteristics of our schools: uniforms, accountability, improving test scores. But I think the charter schools have a very long way to go to be able to prove they have the sustained track record of quality education that Catholic schools do.
In closing, I'd like to apologize for the ongoing construction and the noise in the background of our conversation. I want to thank you both for being in studio with us today, Tim Reedy and Michael Deegan.
Thank you.
Thank
Glad
you.
to be here with you.
Still to come on Independent Sources, finding a way out of forced marriages.
Before that, Abby Shola has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic and community media. From Novogenic, about 100 Greenpoint residents turned up at the Polish Slavic Center recently to discuss how to make Greenpoint greener. The North Brooklyn Development Corporation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation have asked residents in Greenpoint to suggest ideas for a $19.5 million ecological project for the area, which both organizations are overseeing. The large sum comes out of a settlement paid out by ExxonMobil for the oil spill that released an estimated 17 to 30 million gallons of oil into Greenpoint's Newtown Creek back in the 1970s. Members of the Jewish community are up in arms after a federal court denied their plea to lift a regulation on a controversial circumcision ritual. The Forward reports that last September, the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene approved a regulation that would require signed consent to perform metzitza bay. The procedure requires a rabbi to use his mouth to suction blood from the circumcision wound, but it's been reported that the practice could transmit herpes simplex virus, causing serious injury or death to infants. Prominent Jewish leaders who are in favor of the practice say they plan to appeal the decision. The number of undocumented Indian immigrants is relatively small, but is fast growing according to a report from News India Times. The Department of Homeland Security estimates that there are about 240,000 unauthorized Indians in the U.S., a 94% increase from 2000 to 2011. News India Times reports that many Indian immigrants are hoping that the proposed comprehensive immigration reform strategy will include an overhaul to family reunification procedures and the numbers of employment-based visas. From Phil-Am, an opera based on Philippine history is set to debut in New York City in October. The show, titled Noli Me Tangere, or Touch Me Not, is based on a novel by Dr. Jose Rizal, written in 1877. The story chronicles the inequalities that took place in the Philippines during Spanish colonial rule. Rizal, who was an author, physician, and patriot, fought for reform, which led to his execution in 1896 at age 35. And finally, a group of local artists in the South Bronx are working on opening a hip-hop library in the borough that sparked the genre. Inspired by the influence and history of hip-hop music, members of the Rebel Diaz Arts Collective have already collected donations of more than 350 books about the genre, politics, African American history, and biographies by the likes of Malcolm X. The library will be called the Richie Perez Radical Library in honor of a prominent activist from the South Bronx who died in 2004. The library will be housed in an abandoned space in the Bronx that the group acquired and renovated. They are looking to raise more money to rent more accessible space in the community. That from El Diario La Prensa. Those were just some stories making news this week. Back to Gary and Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. Imagine you're 19 years old and your mom and dad tell you that they're ready to marry you off to a complete stranger. After a few supervised dates, you then send off on your own to love and care for someone you barely know.
It sounds like a story out of a Victorian novel, but that's what happened to Freddie Reese. And it happens to hundreds of women here in the U.S. and abroad. Her marriage ended in separation after a lengthy legal battle.
Reese then started an organization called Unchained at Last to help other women like herself who wanted to get out of these arranged or forced marriages. I spoke with Reese about her experiences and her organization. Freddie, give us a sense of the scope of this issue of arranged or forced marriages among young women in this country.
It's a very difficult question to answer because actually nobody has studied that, and we really just don't know how many arranged and forced marriages there are currently in the U.S. The Tahiri Justice Center in 2011 did the first of its kind nationwide survey where it looks specifically at forced marriage, which is defined very narrowly, much more narrowly than Unchained at Last, my organization, would define arranged and forced marriage. And it found 3,000 known or suspected cases just in the previous 2 years of girls as young as 15 in the U.S. who had been forced into marriage.
You were in one of those marriages. Can you tell us about your story?
Yeah, so I was raised ultra-Orthodox Jewish, and when I was 19, my family arranged for me to get married. At the time, I didn't consider it an arranged marriage. To me, this was marriage. This was how marriage always worked. A matchmaker arranged it. A matchmaker went first to the boy's side and approached his family and said, "We have a wonderful girl for your son." And then if the boy said yes, or the boy's parents said yes, then the matchmaker would approach the girl's side.
The boy doesn't get to choose either?
Yeah, this is arranged marriage, and of course, arranged marriages vary widely, and there are different customs and different ways that it works. But the way it worked in my former community was that the matchmaker approached first the boy's parents and then the girl's parents, and then the girl and boy did get to meet in our community, and to get to go on limited dates, so-called, where they were not allowed to be alone together or have any physical contact, and then had a limited number of dates.
That was your situation. You're describing your situation, right?
Yeah, so my situation, I did get to meet him and then had a limited number of so-called dates where we were not allowed to be alone together, not allowed to have any physical contact, and decide, do I want to spend the rest of my life married to this guy?
And how long does this courtship take place?
It's usually a matter of weeks.
Okay. And then what happened next?
And then, you say yes for whatever reason. This is a stranger to you. And then it's usually a very short engagement. I had a 6-week engagement. And then you're married, and because no birth control is allowed, you very soon have children.
Okay. And what happened next after you got married? When did things fall apart in the marriage?
So for me, it was very quickly, actually. We were married for a week when my husband woke up late one morning and was so enraged that he was late and so frustrated that he punched his fist through the wall and left a big hole in the sheetrock. And, it was just downhill from there. What
happened? Why was he so frustrated? Was he equally unhappy in the marriage?
I would say yes, looking back. Clearly, he was also equally unhappy in the marriage and had issues that, that had not been dealt with. Mental illness in that community is very frequently not diagnosed and not treated.
Fascinating. So your organization, Unchained, right? You work exclusively with women, or do you work also with men?
We work exclusively with women from any culture or religion that practices arranged or forced marriage.
Give us a sense of what other religions. You used to be Orthodox Jewish,
right?
And apparently it's not only in this community where these arranged marriages take place. Where else do they take place?
There are several other communities. The ones that we've dealt with so far with Unchained at Last are a lot of Muslim, South Asian communities, some African communities, and then we know that there are other communities as well we have not even reached yet.
Mm-hmm. When did you start the organization? When did you decide it was important, that you were really passionate about this problem, as you said, has to be addressed?
Well, it was about a year ago, and it came out of, I finally managed to get out of my own marriage, and it was a traumatic experience getting out. My family completely shunned me. I have no contact with anyone in my family. I managed to get full custody of my 2 daughters, but a lot of women in my situation do not. But after I managed to get out, managed to move on with my life, got a college degree at age 32, and bought a house for myself and my 2 little girls, I figured, I had a great happy ending. It's time to help other women have the same.
And how do you help them? What do you do? How do you help them?
So Unchained gets these women a pro bono divorce attorney, all kinds of social services and mentoring that they need, social, emotional support. And then Unchained also has a separate program. It's not client-based, an advocacy and awareness program where we raise awareness about this issue in the U.S. and push for changes to laws. For example, minimum marriage age in the U.S. In most states, parents can marry off their children as young as 16, if not younger. We'd like to see an end to that.
And do you have lobbying? How big is your organization? Is it strictly volunteer, or do you have a staff? Tell us about the organization.
At this point, this organization is completely volunteer, although we did recently get funding. We're about to hire a part-time social worker and a part-time attorney. So it is growing. It's growing rapidly. We're already helping more than 40 women, only been around a year. So that's, I think, pretty astounding and shows just the extent of the need that's out there.
What about the men? Who help the men who are stuck in these marriages if they want to get out? Because I think it's a two-way street. Who provides?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and unfortunately, Unchained at Last is the first organization in the U.S. to focus on helping women. There is no organization that I know of that's helping men. and no other organization helping the women. But, you know, and the men do, believe me, I agree with you, they do need help, but we had to start somewhere. I started with women, and women do face additional obstacles beyond what men face when they're leaving. For example, in my situation, a woman under Orthodox Jewish law is not allowed to divorce her husband. Only a man can divorce his wife. And these types of laws and practices and customs are really common among communities that practice arranged marriage. It's often much harder for the woman to leave than for the man.
Give us a sense of why is this happening? Why arranged marriages?
I mean, the parents who arrange marriages or force their children into marriage believe, I think, that they're doing the right thing for their children. This is their custom. This is the way it's always been done. And it probably harks back to a different generation when this is the way marriages started, before the idea of love marriage. So, I mean, I think that these parents do believe that they're doing the right thing for their children.
Okay. Now, the abuses that occur in the relationship, yours being an example, what triggers that? Is it because of being put into this marriage that the man sometimes doesn't want to be in, or what else is going on? Why the abuse?
You know, I don't know if abuse is more common in arranged or forced marriages. Again, no studies have been done, so how do we know that? A lot of the clients who come to me are victims of domestic violence, but I think that's because an arranged or forced marriage has to be really extremely bad for a woman to say, I want to get out, because it's so hard to leave. So I think it's really only the really bad marriages where the women have the guts to say, oh my God, I have to get out of here.
What's the difference between an arranged marriage and a forced marriage?
I'm glad you asked, and my answer is there really is not much of a difference. It's all part of a spectrum. So, for example, in my former community, they'll say, if anything, they don't even consider it an arranged marriage, but if anything, okay, it's arranged, not forced, because the boy and the girl, when they meet, and I say boy and girl, not man and woman, because they're usually really young, they do have some choice. But I always question, what does that mean, choice? When you're pressured to get married by the time you're 19, tops 20, and you have no experience ever dating, and the matchmaker is only going to send you one or two guys, and if you say no, then you're the picky one, they're never going to send you another guy. Is that really a choice? And you have, as I said, these limited dates where you're not allowed to be alone together. They're telling you they're giving you a choice, but I would argue that it's not a real choice. So on this, there's a spectrum of arranged to forced. Obviously, it's different from the parents who actually put a gun to their children's head and say, you're getting married today, which does happen too. It does happen right here in the U.S. It's a spectrum, but there's not much of a difference in terms of how much choice the parties actually have.
Are most of these marriages bad? I mean, do some of them work fine and everybody live happily thereafter?
I wish somebody would study that and look at that. I'm not really sure. I mean, I've seen my own situation was terrible. The people that I've seen around me, my older siblings, my friends, cousins, relatives, everyone was in an arranged marriage. There were not a lot of happy marriages. But now that I'm in the outside world, I look around and I see a lot of unarranged and unforced marriages that are also not very happy. So, you know, I wish I knew if it was happy or not, but I do get upset when people come out and say, oh, arranged marriages are so cute and they're so great and they're so wonderful. There's a much lower divorce rate. Yeah, that's because it's impossible for these people to get out. That's not necessarily because these people are happier. And I wonder if it's possible for arranged marriages where you have two complete, strangers who don't really know each other, someone else puts them together, if it really makes sense to think that they would have a higher rate of happiness. That doesn't seem logical or likely.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Well,
Freddie Reese, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, bringing some island spice to Manhattan's Upper East Side.
finally from us, we continue our series focusing on the city's ethnic food trucks.
This time we get a taste of Caribbean cuisine. Dash Henley produced this report on Yvonne restaurant.
Hi there, how are you? How you been? The name of the business is Yvonne Restaurant, East 71st and York Avenue. I'm here for 20 years. I was born and raised in Jamaica. I live in this country over 40 years. I live in the neighborhood. Yes, I do.
Let me get a little something to eat here.
Yeah, what do you have in mind?
The rice and peas with oxtail.
7, 8, or 10?
No, this is sauce.
Oh, just decide order rice.
You have collard greens today?
Yes. My background really is cosmetics. I worked for Estee Lauder for many years. But back then, my partner and I decided to open a restaurant. And, you know, we got married. Things went very well. We had a restaurant in Harlem. And I just branched out on my own. So half collard greens, half rice?
No.
Separate?
Separate.
Okay, honey. Not a problem. And that's it today? The truck is here Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sundays we're closed. Plantains, all right. Oxtail, rice, plantains. All your food, I'm gonna take a picture. So I have a restaurant in Harlem, yes? On weekends I'm at the restaurant. But I basically stay here, because this is my brainchild. I chose this location because I live in the neighborhood for a long time. And there's a lot of hospitals, there's no kind of ethnic food around. I'm the only one with this ethnic food.
Can I get a chicken patty and cocoa bread?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, I'm always busy all day long, you know. Like right now is a lunch hour. You saw the people here come and go. People come and go, people come and go. Spicy jerk chicken, ready. Nice and hot and spicy. We have 3 sizes, okay? The smallest one is not so hungry. If you're not so hungry, if you decide to step up, we have the little girl, and then we have the big, strong, healthy person size, if you're really hungry.
Little girl.
You're gonna get $7 worth of jerk pork, okay, honey? All right. And everybody stops by. From the hospital, from over there, the Sotheby's, all over. People come from different places, taxi drivers, people passing by. This is very unusual food for this kind of neighborhood. This is the Upper East Side, the Silk Stocking District. So everybody gets really surprised when they see a truck like this in this neighborhood. So this is what makes me stand out. And my food is excellent, because it's prepared with love, lots of love. And I enjoy what I do for the last 20 years. Bye, my darling.
That's our show this week. Thanks for watching.
Till next time, be independent-minded.